Is it holier to be silent? You meet people. We only preach the gospel, brother. We don't get involved in politics. I'm a little more spiritual than you are because I'm not involved. You're still in the worldly realm and you're doing all that. But I'm a little more spiritually advanced because I'm just focusing on myself and the gospel and my personal relationship with God. Well, I have a question for those type of people. Is it holier for you not to be involved? What do you do with Numbers chapter 30? It's the silence equals consent chapter in the Bible. A half a dozen scenarios. One is if a daughter is still living in her father's house and binds herself with a vow, in the day the father hears it, if the father is silent and he holds his peace, her vows stand. But if the father overrules her in the day that he hears of her vows, then none of her vows shall stand and the Lord releases her. That's come down to us as vows in a wedding ceremony. And the pastor tells the church members, if you're silent, you're giving consent to the wedding vows, just like if the dad is silent and her vows stand, so your silence gives consent. Well, so it's a Book of Common Prayer. If anyone present knows of any reason why this couple shall not be joined together in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace. If you're holding your peace, you're giving consent. It's called the rule of tacit admission. It's in Black's Law Dictionary, an admission reasonably inferable from a party's failure to act or speak, right? So it's in law, tacit criminal admissions. And so if your silence gives consent to wedding vows, it gives consent to other things. And if they're killing babies in your community and you're silent, you are giving consent to killing babies, right? And if you give consent to sin, you're going to share in the guilt of the sin and you're going to share in the judgment of the sin. Here's a verse, Leviticus 20. Any Israelite or foreigner residing in Israel who sacrifices any of his children to Molech is to be put to death. If the members of the community close their eyes when that man sacrifices one of his children to Molech, I myself will set my face against him and his family and cut them off from their people together. All you have to do is close your eyes while they're killing the kid and you are guilty. So in California, they actually they had a bill to kill a baby up to 28 days after birth. And enough pastors in California says, I can't close my eyes to this. And they go to Sacramento and they pressure them, right? And it was white pastors, black pastors, Hispanic pastors, Asian pastors, right? They all show up and they pressure them and they rewrote the bill. Now, it's still a bad bill, but they took that part out. Proverbs 24, rescue those who are unjustly sentenced to death. Don't stand back and let them die. Don't disclaim responsibility, but say, I didn't know about it. It says, for God who knows all hearts knows yours and he knows you knew. And he will repay everyone according to his deeds. So the Apostle Paul, Acts 22, talking to the Lord, he says, and when the blood of thy martyr Stephen was shed, I also was standing by, consenting to his death. Paul did not throw a stone. He did not say a word, yet he knew by simply standing there silent while they were killing Paul, he was guilty for the death of Paul. Mordecai goes to Queen Esther, says there's a mandate from the government to kill the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. Here's one, Numbers 20. Moses and Aaron are called unto the door of the tabernacle. And the Lord spake to Moses, take the rod, gather the assembly, thou and Aaron, speak to the rock, and it shall give forth water. And Moses lifted up his hand, and with his rod he smote the rock twice, and water came out. End of the chapter, the Lord spake to Moses, Aaron will not enter the land, because both of you rebelled against my command at the waters of Meribah. It's like, both? I just read the chapter. Aaron didn't do anything. He didn't say anything. Yeah, that's just it. Two people were called to the door of the tabernacle, Moses and Aaron. Aaron heard God tell Moses, speak to the rock. When Moses lifted up the rod the first time and hit the rock, it probably took Aaron by surprise. When Moses lifted up the rod the second time, Aaron knew what was coming, and he was silent. He didn't protest. He didn't say, well, Moses, I was there. I heard God tell you, speak to the rock. Well, hold it. No, Aaron was silent. And in that instant, he was guilty. Moses' was a sin of commission. Aaron's was a sin of omission. The first hitting of the rock, that was Moses' sin of commission. The second hitting of the rock with Aaron silent was Aaron's sin of omission. Another one of those is King Jehoiakim, wicked king. And he has Jeremiah's scroll taken to him, and he has Jehudi read it in the ears of the king and all the princes, and the king's in his winter palace and has a fire burning before him. And whenever Jehudi read 3 or 4 columns of Jeremiah's scroll, the king cut them off with a scribe's knife and threw them in the fire. Yet the princes showed no fear, nor did they tear their clothes, nor did the servants. They stood there watching the king take Jeremiah's prophecy and burn it. They were silent, and you can tell from the context that they were guilty. They were just as guilty as the king because they were watching him doing it, and they weren't. And then you see these other guys, Elnathan and Delaiah and Gemariah, urged the king not to burn the scroll. At least they spoke up. Aaron didn't speak up, but they spoke up. Here's an interesting one, Leviticus 5. When a person sins because he did not speak up, even though he was an eyewitness to a case and knew what happened, anyone who failed to testify, he is guilty. Another translation, when a person sins in that he hears the utterance of a curse, swearing, and he is a witness, and he does not make it known, then he bears his guilt. And then there's a commentary, and it says, if you hear someone cursing, taking God's name in vain, and you're silent, it's as if you took God's name in vain. That even convicts me. How many times have we heard that? I was talking to Alex McFarland last night, and he was saying how he was someplace and there was this big guy and he was yelling at his wife, taking God's name in vain. And Alex couldn't take it anymore. And he goes over there and says, excuse me, sir, you're taking God's name in vain. And God says that he will not overlook that. And you need to ask forgiveness. And he says, this big guy sort of shrunk and hung his head and says, you're right. You know the movie Indiana Jones? There's a scene in there where Harrison Ford takes God's name in vain. And, it says, whoso is partner with a thief hateth his own soul. He heareth cursing and bewrayeth it not. And so here's this short little scene.
Jesus Christ. That's a blasphemy.
It wasn't but a generation ago that people wouldn't put up with that. They heareth cursing and bewrayeth it not. Well, we need to bewrayeth it. And so Leviticus 19:17, it is wrong not to correct somebody who needs correcting. So you got Samuel. It says, and the Lord said to Samuel, I will carry out against Eli everything that I've spoken because his sons blasphemed God, and he did not restrain them. He was doing the sin of omission. Martin Luther King Jr., he who passively accepts evil is as much involved in it as he who helps to perpetuate it. He who accepts evil without protesting it is really cooperating with it. In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. During World War II, you had the German concept of the two kingdoms, the kingdom of the government, the kingdom of the church. The government's killing Jews, the church is silent, and there's somebody that can't be silent anymore. His name is Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And so he starts the confessing church movement. And he says, silence in the face of evil is evil itself. God will not hold us guiltless. Matter of fact, the word Protestant comes from the word protest, right? You have these people that says, I can't be silent, I gotta speak out. Now, we all know this verse, Leviticus 19:18. Love your neighbor as yourself. Do you know the verse right before that? Confront your neighbor directly so you will not be held guilty for their sin. You're loving your neighbor, but they're confronting each other. Another translation, rebuke your neighbor directly so you will not incur guilt because of him. They're loving each other, but they're rebuking each other. New Testament, if your brother sin, rebuke him. Ecclesiastes, it's better to hear the rebuke of the wise than the song of fools. Proverbs, he that rebuketh a man afterward shall find more favor than he that flattereth with the tongue. Revelation, as many as I love, I rebuke and chasten. Hebrews, my son, despise not the chastening of the Lord, nor faint when thou art rebuked of him. For whom the Lord loveth, he chasteneth. Timothy, 2 Timothy 4:2, preach the word, be instant in season, out of season, reprove, rebuke. Titus 2:14, these things speak and exhort and rebuke with all authority. 1 Timothy 5:20, let them that sin rebuke before all. And there are many unruly and vain talkers who subvert whole households, wherefore rebuke them sharply. This is a part of the gospel that we haven't heard very much. And now I'm glad they put this verse in there. Paul, rebuke not an elder, but entreat him as a father, and the younger men as brethren. And so you can rebuke in love. I believe that we were rebuked last night by Andrew, saying that some of the people that, like that one guy that says, oh, the Lord told me to go to Charis, but I got all this other stuff and stuff. And he said, well, you lost me when you said the Lord told you to come here and you didn't, right? That was but he did the rebuke in love. So you can rebuke in love, but I like this verse, rebuke not an elder, but entreat. What's entreat? It's a petitioning, a pleading. You're still not silent. It doesn't say ignore, you're not silent. You're saying something, but you're saying it respectfully. So the woke have a tactic, and the tactic is to guilt trip Christians into being more Christian than Christ. You think, what? Yeah, they say, if you're really a Christian, you will be silent while we teach your kids something that Jesus would never teach. Right? Would Jesus teach the trans agenda? 72 different genders. You can feel different every day. No. Jesus said, in the beginning, God made them male and female. Right? These precious little boys and girls that are made in God's image. And yet they're telling you, if you're really, Christians are tolerant. Christians will stay silent. Matter of fact, they're like wet cardboard. You can kill a baby in front of a Christian, they won't do anything. They don't stand for anything. Watch, we'll even teach them an anti-Christian gospel and make them think that by following Christ, you have to be silent and tolerate it while we teach your kids anti-Christian gospel. We can teach the kids the religion of the Antichrist, but the Christians have to tolerate us. So if you know schools are teaching an anti-Christian sexual views different than what Jesus taught, and you are silent, just waiting for Jesus' return, you're actually giving consent to their teaching of that stuff. And Jesus says, if you cause one of these little ones who trust in me to fall into sin, it will be better for you to be thrown into the sea with a large millstone hung around your neck. It's going to be a rude awakening. It's going to be a rude awakening when church members who think they're being spiritual by not getting involved, when they realize by their silence, they're giving consent to sin. They're inviting the judgment of God upon their heads. All these woke churches, oh, we're not involved, we're going to be silent. You're giving consent to all that stuff. And if you give consent to sin, you are participating in it. You're going to share in the judgment of it.